Yeah, okay, brilliant. Right, thanks everybody, and welcome back. We're getting there, aren't we? So I think that's good, and this is the final session before the final keynote by Professor Gillian Wright, so which I'm very looking forward to. I thought we'd use this time to have a bit more of a panel discussion, want it to be as interactive as we can possibly make it. We want to talk about, how you've seen so much incredible world-class science and technology. Let's spend a bit of time thinking about how can we unlock some of this science and technology for commercialization and economic impact through, increased levels of investment in this new space age that we are seeing in front of us. So I'm welcomed by this fantastic panel. First of all, Stuart, should I introduce yourself, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stuart Martin. I'm the Chief Executive of the Satellite Applications Catapult, which in a month's time will be a job that I've been doing for 10 years.
Oh, congratulations. And Barbara.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Barbara Ghinelli. I'm the director for the Harvard campus and for innovation clusters across UKRI Science and Technology Facilities Council.
And Hitesh?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hitesh Thakrar. I've got several roles. I'm on the council of the STFC and advisor to UKI2S. I'm on the main board of the Turing Institute for AI and Data Science. And I have roles in life sciences where I'm a venture partner at Syncona and on the CRIC, and I run a pre-series deep tech fund.
Andy Muir. Long time ago, I was a respectable research chemist, very much terrestrial, not satellite. I've been investing in early stage companies, most recently with Future Planet Capital for about much longer than Stuart, so about 20 years.
Excellent, thanks a lot, Andy. And yeah, I'm Robert Elliott as well. I'm part of the team at RAL Space, currently working as head of business development. I suppose what I'd really like to understand, first of all, perhaps, is maybe a quick show of hands about who has ever thought or is doing or may at some point in their career thinking about starting or setting up their own space business or being part of a new startup. Can I have a quick show of hands, please? Yeah, good, right, okay, probably about 50%. So we're talking to the right people. I think that's really useful. I think as we go through as well, if you do have a question, put your hand up. And the same to the folk online as well. Keep asking questions, and we'll try and answer them as we go through. So round one of the panel, I think it'd be really interesting to hear from the panel that from some of these individuals sitting here who may potentially have a genuine interest in this area. How could they progress their area of science or technology into a commercial solution? What are the most important actions that they need to be taking, the skills that they need to do now to get a really good outcome? I mean, it always feels like you need to be an expert in absolutely everything to start up these space businesses from science and technology. But have you got any thoughts about what you need to focus on to get started and go?
Can I start?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
At least from my experience dealing with quite a number of startups across many sectors, not just space, I think one of the key things is to have a clear idea of what the innovation is, what is the final goal, and then actually identify what you need on that journey in terms of the skills, access to facilities, the business support as well, which is really important in the journey. So it's really having a clear plan at the start of the journey that you intend to take and really understand what is the end goal. What customer are you going to serve? And that goes back to Nick, you did a fantastic presentation, but special platform for all this discussion, I think. It's really about the timescales as well of how long it would take to actually deliver that final product. So I think that is a starting point.
Yeah, and Hitesh?
Yeah, I want to start with the bad news to say that statistically most startups fail. And that is, a lot of it is down to people. So you've got the great idea, but your founders and the chemistry between your founders is so important. And only because the most successful startups, you have an idea, you don't always end up with what you thought you were going to do. So the ability to pivot and change your plan and have flexible thinking is actually far more important than what you thought you were going to start with. I think if you can have a team which is able to do that, and often venture capital people think about, are these founders coachable? And that's probably the most important thing I look at.
I think the biggest skill you need, I'm just going to repeat some of the things my panelists say. The biggest skill I think you need is the ability to listen, because where you need to start is listening to what your potential customers' problems are, and then you can think about how you fit into those solutions. So start by talking to as many people as you can and trying to understand what their pain points are. And I think you'll get investors' attention.
Right. You want to add to that, Stuart? Or?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously over the last 10 years, we've worked with hundreds of different companies and different startups and different ways of approaching this problem. And some of them have been very strong teams, some have been very strong technologists and less strong on sort of knowledge of the market they're trying to address. And so you really do find that there are two extremes, where one is, I've got this technology that I think must be useful and I need to try and find something to do with it. And right the way to the other end, but I've got this problem I'm trying to solve, but I've got no idea what solution is actually going to help me do that. I think in general, it's that second one that tends to be more successful. And sometimes you can end up combining the two, and then you're in a very strong position. You've got a strong market knowledge and a strong technology solution. And if you can make that work, then you're in a good place. I suppose the other thing is that sort of having spent 10 years with the catapults and working with my colleagues across other catapults, we've all been on the same journey trying to work out what a catapult is to start with, and what problems we're trying to solve and how we're trying to address them. And I think the thing that we all realise is that, looking across different sectors, is that the challenges of commercialisation of science are quite different in different sectors. And we tend to think that the relationship between scientists and industrialists is basically the same in all different sectors, but it really isn't. And there are some quite profound differences. And by just way of one simple example is, if you look at the life sciences industry, obviously this is an industry that's well understood in this country. It's an industry that we are, have very strong international success in. In that, you have the science community is providing outputs and knowledge and intellectual property that industry is then taking to the market. And so there's a strong incentive there with industry and the academic sector to work very closely together to pull that technology through. In space, it's actually the other way around in the large part. I think most of the science community in this room is at the other end of the pipe. It's we're using space technology to do science, which is no direct relevance to the industry. There are spin-out benefits to industry that can be exploited, but you're actually science is a demand driver to the space sector more than it is a science driver. And I think that's explains why we have a slightly different relationship between our industry and our academic sectors in this industry compared with the life sciences. I think understanding those dynamics is really important to trying to figure out how you take benefit from it.
And do you think it's narrowed at all over the last 10 years that since the catapults were established? It was the catapults were always built on this premise of the existence of a TRL valley of death. Do you reckon that still exists, or have we moved on from that now, do you think?
Well, I think all catapults have ended up, so there are many valleys of death. I think that's the challenge. Right. I think where the catapults, I think, have all found their niche is in the area where we have a strong science base. We're able to take science to a demonstrator level, or we're able to create some capability, demonstrate that some technology can be built on the back of that science. But then we lack the industrial pathways and the industrial architecture to get that technology into the market. And so that's where the catapults then sit to try and help support the creation of that industrial architecture so that those products can come to the market. In the industries where where that architecture exists, so aerospace, pharmaceuticals, automotive, we don't need catapults, but we need catapults where those new industries are needed.
Is there anybody else want to add? I mean, just to move on, I mean, is that, do you think from maybe an investor perspective, is there something about the UK sector that's particularly attractive? Do we have like an unfair advantage, do you think, in some ways in the UK space sector as opposed to others, or maybe not? Thoughts on that?
maybe I come in there. I mean, if you look at any government report, they only talk about three things: AI, data, life science, and space. And I think that's true. And if you see all the capital that's gone into deep tech in the last 5 years, it's in one of those three areas. So there is a built-in advantage either in early research. And there is multiple valleys of death, even in the venture world, depending on which stage of the investment round you're in. But that's a problem for the more of the UK structure, which we may get onto. But I think there is an unfair advantage in the sense that we have knowledge and we have very good scientists, and the commercialization is still a challenge, I would say.
And also like a skill, I guess, a skills perspective, are there, it'd be really good for the space sector to kind of soak up the skills and knowledge that you have as well, about, where to go and, how to pitch and create a value proposition, is there, do you think there's
Yeah,
opportunities
I mean,
there?
it's what's interesting in other sectors. If I talk about life science sector for a second, more sophisticated, it's been around for many, many years. And we've built a number of incubators and accelerators, which have gone on to build and support companies. So the company I'm involved with, the venture fund called Syncona, set by the Wellcome Trust. And it's slightly tried to change the model of life science investing in the sense that most of our science gets commercialized in the US. But by setting up a cornerstone investor with 200 million, now it's 800 million plus, you can go all the way from some naked biology to launching a product, which historically we've not done. We tend to kind of give up the best of the assets where you've got the growth curve to the US. And so there are models which, permanent capital models really, they're not many, but that allow, if there's a model like that in the space sector, would allow you to kind of go through these multiple valleys and go all the way to commercialization. Okay.
I would add to that as well, because again, my experience dealing with different sectors across the different clusters, there is an awful lot of value of learning from each other. Actually, the life sciences sector, although it's advanced in certain ways, is not in others. So it's, for example, the use of technology, bringing it into the, for example, solutions for the NHS.
Yeah.
That still is a huge challenge. And I do believe, because I've worked for a lot of my career in the space sector, that actually that innovation that we used to bring in our sector, for example, the use of AI for image recognition, I've done a PhD over 20 years ago in that, using artificial neural networks. But then when I talked to the life sciences sector, it was almost like the beginning of it in the life sciences sector only a few years ago. And we can actually learn so much from each other, and that risk appetite of using certain technologies and the way that you can actually de-risk by learning from each other. So I think there is a lot to learn on that.
Yeah. And I mean, next slide, design, build and test. I've seen a bunch of synthetic biology companies use exactly the same model. So I actually think the similarities are greater than the difference. But I will say that I think this, and I know I'm here at STFC's invitation, but I think the campus here, and the cluster is a fantastic competitive edge, because we have 6 or 7 companies based here, I think, in our portfolio. People can move around between companies. We don't obviously encourage that, because that can be awkward sometimes. But and their partners can work here. They can work with the scientists here. They can work with the corporations, with ESA. So keep whatever you're doing, and I'm not sure how. I'm not sure how you did it, but keep doing it.
Keep doing it. Okay, yeah.
I mean,
Does anybody else want to add anything in there, or any questions on that aspect? We got any questions? Oh, hello. Maybe we'll get the mic so we get it online. Yeah.
Given our economic climate and our political climate, and I was looking at Nick Appleyard's comments about new space and speculative technology becoming real. The politicians don't seem to know very much about space tech or tech, really. I just wondered the difference that it might make in starting up businesses, a conducive atmosphere to start up businesses. And I did hear a couple of weeks ago, a group of Tory MPs said they wanted Rishi Sunak to have a vision of the future, which I think we'd all like.
Yeah.
So I just took some comments on it, really, about politicians and how much they improve or don't improve the situation.
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, can we get politicians talking about space in their speeches and in their questions?
I mean, space, it seems to me, is a very photogenic subject.
it is.
So,
Yeah.
I don't think it's difficult. I mean, I think I'm not the greatest fan of the current administration, but I think if you look at what organisations like Innovate UK, EcoEye have done, Professor Mazzucato constantly reminds us that all of the big innovations are built on the back of public investment. And I think that absolutely is true. And whilst you should all write to your local MP and say that Rishi Sunak should not be reducing R&D tax credits. So there are some things that could be improved, but in general, I think there's a lot of support. You should keep it up.
Go on.
I was just going to go on.
Sorry, we're too kind. Okay, no, and I should say that the motivation behind the creation of the clusters here at Powell and then the wider cluster model that we are applying across the UK, I think it's really been driven by government in terms of, that we received already over a decade ago, we had received already £2 billion of investment into our large science infrastructure on this campus. And government was extremely keen for us to make much more impact from it, from the science and technology derived from this investment. And actually that was the motivation behind the development of the clusters, which was really a mechanism in simple terms to bring the sectors together. So across industry, academia, public sector organizations, creating that collaborative environment and the ecosystem that facilitates those collaborations. So I think government is very important, whatever government it is really actually has got a pivotal role in enabling certain initiatives and moving those forward.
And I'm going to also give a pat on the government, unusually, in the sense, the way the tax system works in angel investing. People may have come across SEI, SEIS. It is the most attractive system for investing in the world. And unfortunately, it drops off quite quickly because there's not enough, it's not big enough. But at the early stage, individual angels who invest in about 3 billion, and other countries come here to learn about our tax system. So there are things which, and it's not this, it's been around for 20 years or something, so it's been around a long, long time. But there are things the government have been doing to pump prime. What's the two things that are missing is some of this commercialization, there's not enough follow-through capital, which then brings in usually the US to take the best ideas forward. And something I was involved in for 25 years in public markets, there isn't enough public market capital to take these companies either to IPO, and if they do want to list, they tend to list in the US.
Yes, I mean, is that, and I guess that's typically true as well in the space sector, where you've got really capital intensive, potentially in many cases, not all, but that you think that's something that could be improved upon.
And Seraphim's a good example, which is an investment trust like Syncona, raised some capital here, did an amazing job, kind of try to change the model in space. All their companies are listed in the US, I think. So there isn't enough public market knowledge in the STEM subjects where you can invest in these companies, and we have the largest pension industry in the world.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, I think investors think a bit like politicians, and that we don't really think of space as a market. We try not to think about technologies, but as just Nick and Stuart said, we think about what's the ultimate goal. So if you articulate to politicians that you're reducing maritime emissions or improving agricultural yields, frankly, it doesn't really matter what the technology is, but if that's space, that's the message. What's the underlying improvement in productivity or prosperity or people's lives that your science enables? If that makes sense.
We are.
Sure.
Okay. I'm just on the political question. I'm actually quite encouraged at the moment. I mean, clearly, what political environment are we in this week? But the budget statement 2 weeks ago now, that it had sort of 3 headline statements. One was the energy crisis. One was the international security situation, and the third was that innovation is the way we're going to get out of our current economic malaise. And I think that's picking up on our science minister, who's got a fantastic narrative about the phases our economy has been through over the last since the Second World War, really, and how we now need to create that next phase. The period of consumption-driven service economy where where our economy exists by moving other people's money around and trying to cream some off the top. Then that's not a recipe for economic success. We've actually got to have a purpose as a country, and we've actually got to create something. And actually, innovation is the way that we do that. So I think that there's actually that's not a message that has come through any budget statement in recent years. So all the turmoil that we've been through over the last few years, I'm actually quite hopeful that actually we've come to a sensible conclusion that hopefully we're at the end of that now, and we can look forward more positive. There was some some good news in that budget around innovation, about retaining commitments to innovation spend, and part of that was the catapult budget was being approved. So, so that was good. But so there is some reason for optimism there.
Brilliant.
And there is a reason for optimism because space cross-cuts across all those areas that you listed, right? So we are moving more and more towards this domain approach rather than sector approach. It's really considering space in relation to many other technologies and how do they come together to actually deliver what is needed across many fields, including energy, including healthcare, everything that improves our society standard.
Brilliant. Any questions online then,
We
Vicky?
do, yes. So again, from Richard Blott, commercialisation invariably requires much more funding than invention. Innovation programmes such as the Horizon programmes begin to offer that level of funding. National investment does not even approach those levels. Inward investment is or can be a Trojan horse because commercialisation profits tend to go offshore. UK commercial investment tends to be short term. How do we find a way through those constraints? Quite a lot.
Very thorough question, but excellent. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I mean, this is the central problem, the nut that we all need to try and crack. How do we try and crowd in the right kind of money that's going to enable the industrialization, the commercialization of these new technologies to take place, and the benefits remain here and accrue here to the UK, and that's what we're all trying to do, I think. And that is the hard bit.
That I think goes back to the science superpower. Why do we want to become a science superpower? Because then by doing that, we attract that inward investment. We have to look at private investment. We can't just look at, expecting the government pays for everything, and it's through that excellence that we are attracting it. And this is why centers like Howard and many others around the country that promote that excellence for the UK as a whole are so important for the growth of the wider economy, because they attract the attention of those inward investors. And we've got fantastic examples, to be honest. I mean, even companies on this campus that have come, very small, investing a little bit, like Astroscale is a good example. They've found this ecosystem. They've actually been able to grow because they've been supported from all over the ecosystem, and then off you go, you attract more investments and more growth,
and
so on.
And I think it's worth pointing out that even this panel here, there's a fantastic selection of support and investment opportunities. It kind of got me thinking last night, that there might be somebody here in the audience, and you've already 50% of you I know already thought about starting a space business. Is there anybody here willing to stand up and pitch their idea or their new product or service? You may be it may be part of a larger institution or as a startup idea. If anybody wants to stand up and pitch to these guys,
Dragon's Den.
that would be awesome.
We're the good guys.
This wasn't a brief.
I'm the good guy.
Look, we have a volunteer. Fantastic. Right, let's get a microphone. And no idea is a bad idea, so it's.
And he's not prepped us either.
How much time do you have?
1 minute.
1 minute.
Okay.
4 minutes.
I'm Dan Ettenberg, CEO of the Aerospace. We're building big chemical propulsion systems for heading to MEO, GEO, or lunar orbit, basically green propellants. We aim for a larger vision of decarbonizing the space economy by transforming launch into green. Very ambitious, but right now we're starting with propulsion systems this big, more or less, for getting to higher orbits, responsive, say to deploy infrastructure in just days instead of months, basically. Thank you.
Well done. Anybody want to respond? I mean, how much money are you looking for?
Yeah, exactly.
5.
£5.
Currency and unit. I mean,
Pounds, I imagine.
and have you had any grant funding or anything to get you going?
It's a big, great edge. Then others run. Till now, we raised about 0.6 million.
Okay.
With that, we accomplished many milestones. We are tier 5, maybe 6 right now. So we are firing 11 engines. We launched the first rocket in the world to be powered by biofuels. And we have many technologies in house that will help.
And how long will that 5 million last you?
24 months, and then we
Okay.
keep us going until we test in orbit.
So that's about right. And when we see startups, you want 18 months, 24 months runway, and you don't want to over raise, you don't want to under raise, because you want to build to a milestone, and then hopefully the valuation goes up at the next round and you raise more cash. And often a lot of startups get offered a lot of money quite early, and it's very inefficient allocation, even though you might want to take more. The other thing I would suggest is Innovate UK have opened up a equity partnership program, where if you get an investor in, they'll match. So it's the other way around, and which is kind of good way of taking money in because it's non-dilutive.
So can we do like a B2B meet? Can I broker a meeting afterwards? Is that all right? Yeah,
Happy
awesome. Right.
Yes, I'm
Fantastic.
also happy to chat to you anytime.
Oh, we've got 2.
I'm in.
Fear of missing out.
Yes.
So your
So-
biggest asset when you're raising capital is to generate the fear of missing out.
Correct.
I'm not joking. That is a
That
genuine
is true.
thing.
You need as many
Yeah.
term sheets as you can. Seriously.
Can I ask just a simple question about what is your biggest challenge? You asked about the 5 million pounds, but what else do you need in order to progress your business forward?
Well, basically, with that amount of money, we can actually get the product ready. What we are not traveling or having a challenge with customers. They recover tier 9, we have tier 5 with investment as basically a loop, endless loop that we need the funds to get tier up. And basically, it's the big challenge. I think with the right investment, we can then get there fast and get our systems ready. Basically.
The health word of warning is 4 million is high for a UK early stage fund, say if you're angels. So you need a corporate type venture investor for that kind of money. So
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. That's brilliant. Yeah, that's totally off the cuff. So there wasn't. I hadn't briefed you, right? So, that's brilliant. I think yeah. So let's try and move on. I suppose a good next question might be to Andy. So particularly because we're talking about how do we pull through space science and technology. What are you as an institutional investor looking for from a researcher in particular? It's something that I really don't know the answer to. So I'm just really curious.
Yeah, good question. Well, I think at the risk of repeating myself, we're looking for someone who understands a real world problem, and investors are prepared to take on the risk of developing technology as long as we can see there's an attractive customer market at the end of it. So know your customers, I think, is the first thing. Secondly, competition. What's your unique secret sauce that's going to stop other people doing the same thing? Why is it hard to do? Investors are willing to take on technology risk as long as there's some barrier to entry. And then I guess investors, the more mature the company comes, the more it becomes about the team and less about the idea. So we're looking for people who are good at building a team around them. Obviously it's not going to be a very big team on day one, but if you can show that you both, maybe you can find a chairperson or a mentor or something who's got complementary skills to you, and that normally means probably if you're a scientist, some sort of commercial experience. And I think those would be 3 really good things. Yeah, solving a real world problem. You can interact with other people. And I can't remember. And secret sauce. Yeah, those are my 3 things.
Yeah, okay. And I'll throw it out there to people as well. Maybe, I'm really keen on this sort of skills thing. The talks this morning were really inspirational. Are there barriers in terms of entrance? People must think, there's no way I could ever start a space business, you know, but actually you can, and there's actually a heap of support out there. I mean, I'm looking at Joanna, you know, because I know she'll have a thought. I mean, have you got any thoughts about, you know, are there barriers in terms of skills to access this kind of support that's available?
So I think across the piece is, I think the real challenge, and it was just highlighted by Andy, is that mix of skills that you've got to be able to bring to the piece. And I think identifying where your weaknesses are and how that fits. Are we missing skills? I think one thing we really need to think about is, how do we train up the missing skills? How can we design really innovative training schemes to add the gaps? And I think one of the challenges with that is how using the environment around, using the panelists in front to actually be able to say, where are the gaps? Which bits are people missing? Because there's plenty of capability across the UK to design the skills or design the training programs, but it's trying to identify where all those gaps are and who can help.
Yeah, so if we had like a, you know, 10-week intensive course in space entrepreneurship, you know, I think people could, you know, be really interested in that, right? And maybe that exists. I mean, do you think
the Seraphim Bootcamp
is
is a pretty good program, actually.
Yeah.
You haven't come across it.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
I would even think more widely than just space entrepreneurship, because we've been talking about, you know, how to address specific customers, you know, customer requirements. So we're actually talking about, you know, how space relates to other fields and other markets, right? So I think, personally, I think that we need to really think more on how to actually cross-fertilize different sectors, and that those skills need to be actually incremented in that way, rather than just specifically within the space sector.
Okay.
It's really that interface that will make a difference. And we see this here a lot, because we have on this campus alone 4 clusters, one early one in quantum, but the other ones being space, health, energy. Already we see a third of our companies in each of the clusters work with at least another cluster. That is creating a really healthy cross-fertilization and transfer of skills and understanding of how, you know, those markets work, the respective markets work. That is something that is happening on a day-to-day basis because of the contact between those people. Obviously, that's not possible if you're thinking about, you know, the broader scale across the UK. So we need to find the mechanism that actually allows that to happen anyway, even if you're not collocated.
Yeah.
So that to me is a big challenge that we really need to think about.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, we've got a question right up at the top there.
Thank you. Hi. Perhaps a question that you can address as well as part of the bootcamp when you set that up. But I imagine that often you're dealing with startups that maybe have scientists or specialists who perhaps don't have a commercial background. So I guess the question is, what are some really common misconceptions or misunderstandings that as a result end up being a barrier to some of these startups trying to get going and actually commercialize their offering?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. Thank you. Yeah. Would anybody like to go for that first? But really interested to hear.
I mean, I think it's the initial, as you get excited founders in science, is the overexcitement around the science and the technology, which is great, because if you're a technology investor like me, you know, get excited about it. But ultimately, it's about returns if you're a venture fund. So you've got to kind of think about quite early on, either having a mentor or advisor structure, somebody who's done it before, and actually incentivizing them if you need to through options or some kind of incentive for them to take you through that journey. And often we see pitches every month, 3 or 4 companies. And if you see just technical people in front of you, you're already thinking, where's the plan to go to the next stage, as Andy's asked. And I think if you had somebody in the room who'd done it before, even as for that one meeting, it's often a good signal that you're thinking about the next stage.
I think it's also worth just emphasizing that not every business is a venture business, right? Most of the businesses in this country are not venture backed. Most of the people employed are not employed by businesses which have been financed by venture. So there are lots of good business ideas. which might not have any possibility of becoming the next Spire, but are perfectly good businesses, and that shouldn't hold you back from starting what might be a lifestyle business, or it might just be a business that's going to be bigger than that, but not a venture company.
And eventually those get merged with something else as well, right? So that's the other way of thinking about expanding it. They don't all need to go to stock markets or anything like that.
And Mo, you've got a question there. Wait for the mic though, so the online can hear.
Thanks. So this is a question, I guess, for the VCs in the room. You talked about capital markets and the drive, the need for capital markets to kind of get listed, let's say, in the London Stock Exchange. And in the space industry, you also mentioned some of them, lots of companies actually going out and listing, Spire being one of them, and Planet also having a UK founder. And these are losses that I've seen that I feel there's a gap. And one of the questions that's always been in the back of my mind is also part of it is founder equity, because founder equity that in the US is a completely different mindset, has a completely different mindset, and it's actually front and center of a lot of VC narrative, partly to attract the best in class, but also I think if you look at some of the spin-outs and the way that they structure their licensing deals, such as MIT, if you think about MIT, some academic institutions, they have pretty rapid IP, license deal execution, and it's pretty, the wheels are really geared to execute deals quickly. Deal flow goes rapidly, and then founders are really incentivized throughout that whole process, even up to capital markets. And I wondered, is there something to learn from that, so that you don't have these losses in the UK? And if it's not just that, do you think there's other elements that the UK could be learning from, so that you don't have these losses?
Okay.
Just as the public markets. No.
Well, I mean, are there any TTOs in the room? So I better be careful what I say. But that's one of the challenges around how you deal with your local TTO. And the US structure is IP tends to belong to the founder more often. And in the UK, I think Cambridge is the only one that gives you founder IP. So then you've got to negotiate the barrier with your university TTOs. And I think it's getting better, but they're not all the same. So there's that challenge around how much equity should the university own. But your public market question is two reasons to it. First of all, the UK is an old stock market and is still the Victorian stock market, they call it, banks, commodities, etc. So it's never been a market on technology. We've got the AIM market, which has never really successfully raised enough capital. Oxford Nanopore is listed in the UK is unusually, but most of them will go straight. And the reason for that is valuation. A similar company here in the UK, the same company doing the same thing, often better, would probably get 2 to 3x time the valuation. So founder equity incentivization, you own 5% of a $1 billion company. Of course, it's very easy for the US venture capital guys to say, come over here. And we've tried to do this in the UK with a patent box in life sciences. So if you stay in the UK, you only pay 10% tax on your final drug. And so there are sector-specific incentives which government could do. I'm not sure if there's anything in space, but that's one way of thinking about it.
Anna's got a question here as well. And then I'll move on after that, I think.
Thanks. So we talked a lot about IP just there and kind of commercialization and protection of the knowledge, I guess. But is there any particular problem associated with dealing with IP in the downstream space sector? It's one thing to put IP on a widget, a metal thing that can be held up in court and say this is the same as this one. Whereas with the downstream services, we're talking about lines of code which are very much more difficult to patent, I expect. Yeah. Are there any thoughts about that?
No. Stuart, you got any thoughts?
Well, I mean, this is a really good question. I mean, I think having watched the way that the EO market has evolved over the last 20 years, really, and it's the Earth observation market, and how we've seen machine learning come in and completely change the dynamic and make it much quicker for any company to get a new product to market once they've understood a piece of information or a piece of commodity value that they can sell to the market. And so you see a lot of companies now who are using machine learning on Earth observation data and providing all sorts of different services. But actually, although it's made it easier to get things to market, for the very same reason, it's made it much harder to protect software and to protect IP. And so it's the hard work that you go through in order to work out, to have that dialogue with customers, trying to work out what is the piece of information that's going to be valuable to them that we can sell them. That's a really time-consuming and hard piece of work to do. But as soon as you've done that and other people work out what that piece of value is, then it's really quick for them to reproduce it with a piece of machine learning. And that's a dynamic in the market at the moment that's very problematic. And so it's it is cutting down on, it is making some of these businesses harder to invest in.
Okay, and some comments from online?
Yeah, so another question actually picking up previously from what was mentioned during our Dragon's Den piece. So this from Simon Proud, question for Andy. You mentioned that £4 million is a large amount of early investment. What is the typical range of investment amounts for early stage space tech, and perhaps any differences separately for upstream and downstream?
I think it was Hiteshi. I said that was a lot of money
For angel, for early stage.
Gosh, that's a good question, and I'm not sure. Rather than make some numbers up, I think I'd have to say I'd have to look it up. Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's a kind of rule of thumb that you always sell something between 20 and 30% of the company on any funding round. So to Mo's question, I think in the US, the difference is that companies are raising much bigger amounts of money because there's more venture capital. So a lot of these problems flow back to there's just not enough capital in the market. But now I'm not really answering your
maybe I can have a go. Maybe I can have a go. You kind of investors tend to reverse engineer the number. So if you're a Series A investor or an early stage investor, you need kind of 10 times your money. And so you can work backwards and you say, this company might be worth 5 million. So you're going to think about, can I see this valuation go to 50 million in the next X period? And then the assessment about the market question is really important, because if the market's small and you can't see 10x on it, then you won't invest. So it's more thinking how you get back the money you need to invest in the long term to get your 10x. And as you go through multiple rounds, the return requirements go less and less because you're de-risking the asset. So in your fourth or fifth round, investors might only need double the money, 2x. And you typically, when you go to IPO, the round before IPO, investors only need 1.5 times, because it's de-risked. You've got people, you've got commercial, you've got a board. And so it's kind of quite a linear way of thinking about the rounds and what you need to do.
And then, so let's try and move that on then, and maybe we can talk a bit about the work that you've been doing, Barbara. You are world recognized for the work that you put into developing these world-class clusters. They've provided this most incredible platform for innovation and investment, and yet we see the National Space Strategy. It says it wants to be the best place to start a business in the world. That's quite ambitious. The question is, I suppose, is there a point where clusters end and something else takes over that needs to be more ordered? Is that maybe a bit controversial, or is it just clusters just get bigger and bigger and more complicated? Or do we have to figure out a way to evolve them to be more like a supply chain delivering a product at the end of it? What's your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and many questions within it.
Right.
So thank you. I'll try and think through what you've asked. A cluster can grow and grow and grow. We've demonstrated this here very, very well in terms of the space cluster is a good example and topical for this. We started with a couple of organizations over a decade ago, and now we've got over 100 with 1,400 people and growing and growing. Same with the other clusters. The job growth has been at least 20% per annum, and now actually even more than that across many sectors. So yes, there is nothing wrong for clusters to grow and continue to grow, because that means that the economy is growing. What is happening within our clusters, as an example, we expect the impact of this growth is actually going outwards as well more now. So we're not just seeing the growth within the campus, but we're seeing very large networks of organizations growing outside, and the impact of the cluster cluster I'm talking about in terms of the capabilities, the partnership, the access to what we've got here overall in terms of facilities, knowledge base, and so on, is actually reaching out more and more. What I think is that we need more mechanisms to do this, more structured mechanisms. Rebecca mentioned earlier in the first speech that clusters are an important mechanism. We need to have a strategy about this across the UK, and that is actually reflected also in the National Space Strategy. Clusters are an important mechanism. We probably need to work a little bit more to really understand how that is going to be implemented. But in terms of the local clusters, how do they evolve? In terms of what's happening here, for example, I mentioned before, we have kind of moved from a sector approach. We started developing clusters in specific sectors of high economic growth as we started. But now we're actually moving into more of a domain approach in a way that leverages the great capabilities. So where the sum of the parts is bigger than the individual parts together. The Net Zero Living Laboratory is a great example of that, of an evolution of multiple clusters actually addressing big challenges, big world challenges by bringing together technologies, space and energy, or space and big science, like it happened with the recent spin out, the Sunburn from Reaction Engine and ICIS, our facility here, the Neutron Spallation Source, to create a new net zero fuel solution for aviation and maritime and other sectors, which are very difficult to decarbonize. So, that's only one example. But it's something that is happening, and ecosystems like this are really important because they provide a controlled environment where you can actually develop, validate, test, and then eventually scale up new solutions across the UK. So it's not just something that is happening here, but it's the adoption much more widely. And that then relates to your question of the supply chain. Obviously, this implies a much larger supply chain, which extends beyond the locality, beyond the place where the cluster is. I don't know whether this answers your question.
It's a good attempt, I think. I mean, anybody had any thoughts on that? Oh, there's somebody at the back there. Oh, it's Jeff, is it? Yeah.
Barbara, that's really good because you sort of stole my question there, really. Thinking about what you were saying earlier, and Andy on the right, about knowing your customer and knowing the challenge. But then Barbara raises the concept of a really big problem that needs a family. As we said, it's a family business, isn't it, space? And we know it's space, therefore it's expensive, therefore there's not enough money. So you've got Gov on one side, you've got venture capitalists, and you've got other NGOs. I'm wondering where you would get a cluster of challenge owners, if you like, that would move around the problem and own the problem, and then say to the solution community, which is us and others here, what would that look like in terms of investment for that? That's complex, and that's really difficult to do. But as you know, name some of the challenges. But climate emergency, space debris, these are difficult things that we do need to deal with. And I just wondered what your thoughts are of getting the money, because there isn't enough money for that, certainly in government, certainly where I sit, but certainly what you see in other areas. We need the big players to step up. It says in both space strategies, it uses the word leverage. That's what we're talking about here today, isn't it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So I think that's a great question. It's really at the heart of what we are inspiring to and what we're doing here. It's a challenge-driven approach for sure. So what we're doing, just to give you a very quick example, we are, for example, planning to do more events which are challenge-focused, so they bring cluster organizations together around the challenge so that you get those sectors together. And actually within those sectors is the big players you're talking about, because a lot of, well, all of our clusters actually involve the small companies and startups we're talking about, those that are growing really fast, SMEs, and then you've got the big players with the big money. And because of the success of the growth of this campus, we're actually attracting a lot of those big inward investors from all over the world. And those are the deep pockets. And almost an obvious example is even with our joint venture partner. Now, for those of you who don't know, that the campus is managed by a joint venture between the public sector and the private sector. The public sector includes SDSC, the Atomic Authority and Energy Authority, and the private sector is Brookfield Asset Management, which is the second largest asset management organization in the world. So they've got deep pockets, and even in this period, they can afford to put capital investment forward. And that capital investment is coming to the benefit of the organizations in the region, but also more widely. And so that is a good way of.
Yeah, thanks very much. And just quickly over to Stuart as well. I mean, you've been here, I guess, physically as part of the satellite applications catapult. You're part of this huge network of catapults as well. I mean, what have you seen over that period in terms of this growth or support for investment? And is there any inherent differences in different sectors as well? Things we can learn from?
Yeah, there definitely are. I mean, there are some sectors who are leaning forward now. They know they've got problems to solve, and they know that the space sector can be part of the solution, even if they don't quite know how yet.
Yeah.
So the challenge and the opportunity is how do we mobilize their investment capacity in order to help bring forward those solutions that will help solve the big problems that we all know we've got, and also help them with their direct challenges that there as a consequence. And the trick there is, I think we tend to think about this as being trying to find somebody who's going to put some money up so that we can build something that's going to meet their problem. It's not quite as simple as that. It's about how can we iterate and move forward in an economically sustainable way that sort of changes the way that industries operate and largely in an incremental way, but in the end in a transformative way that sort of helps the cash flow from these other industries into the solutions that we can provide.
And is the satellite catapult probably the best catapult in the world?
Probably.
Yeah, I think I do. We got good catapults. Yeah. No, it's fantastic. That kind of sustained support, I think, for the whole of the UK and the growth that we've seen through it.
Very good to say so. Thank you.
That's brilliant. I mean, any other comments? We've got Ben up at the back there.
Yeah, just to say that the UK has just made a big investment decision. It's invested $1.84 billion in ESA.
Yep.
So my question is, if the government said to you, here's 1.84 billion to invest over the next 3 years in the space industry in the UK, how would you invest it?
Great question. What you mean with a blank? If you just had a blank sheet of paper? Yeah. Yeah. So it's slightly less. Well, I guess that's a question for everybody as well. I mean,
yes.
What are the core technologies? I mean, anybody want to pitch into that?
I think this.
I think we could probably match it straight away with private investments. We'll double it.
I mean, there is an argument for we have momentum and we have programs running and we have industry capacity that's aligned towards that investment. So there is an argument for actually, if we want to make a change of direction, let's do it in small steps rather than in one stop all of that and then start something completely new.
Yeah.
But I think we have to be realistic that our relationship with ESA is going to change because of our relationship with the way that the EU is changing, and that's something that we need to manage and respond to in the years ahead.
And I think you were going to say something.
I was going to say something about skills. Really, we touched on it earlier, and with my role at the Turing, it's going to be a big challenge for this country to produce enough data scientists. And if I had extra incremental money, I'd think about how you can generate more skills in those areas.
Yeah, okay.
Because you're now not competing with the tech companies, as I said earlier. We're competing with life science companies. Those sectors are converging. You've got space needing all the data we can do. And so there's a kind of a wall of skills required, which is going to be a big challenge for any of these sectors.
And that probably draws me to perhaps my last question to the panel, which is, and it's probably related to Ben's question as well. You know, if we've got if you want to take a portfolio of risk and you like look at the sort of the real outliers, the real disruptive transformational changes, have you got any sort of half crazy, half baked sort of areas that you'd want to invest in? You know, what are the outliers, the opportunities that you see in the next maybe 5 to 10 year period? Have you got any thoughts on that?
There are lots of thoughts. I think lots of things that we're already doing, even exploring how you actually use resources in space to be sustainable in space.
Yeah.
Right? There are millions of opportunities there. Where, just to bring one example of many, you know, when I speak to pharmaceutical companies, and sometimes I brought up the space opportunity. You know, they look at me still very, you know, oh, intriguing, interesting, but how? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think we have worked out the how at all. We have done a little bit, maybe in terms of how do you exploit the microgravity environment, for example, for drug discovery. We've done a few projects even here on the campus, working with cancer research and a few companies here, you know, to commercialize the opportunities of the microgravity environment. But well, we don't have a clear narrative and a clear way forward.
Okay. And then Andy, you know, have you got any kind of hot areas that you'd like to, you know, be thinking about in the next 5 years that you've got your eye on?
I'm a big fan of Neil Stevenson, so almost any of the ideas in his books would be awesome. But I think currently harvesting power in space and transmitting it back to the ground would be definitely on my shortlist.
Okay, cool.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's where to start, really. Isn't it? I mean, I don't think there are. Yeah, I don't think there are any real wacky ideas anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you know, when we started out, the things like 3D printing organs in space and those sort of things that we were talking about as concepts 10 years ago, you know, people are doing that now. People are actually starting to develop that. Space-based solar power would have been, you know, hard to talk about even 3 years ago. Now there's some very serious conversations that happen all around the world. So it's
great.
There is no wacky.
Any last final question, maybe online or anybody from the audience before we draw it to a close? I think it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for your participation, and as well, I think the format worked really well. So I'd like to give yourself and our audience a big round of applause. Thank you.